This is the Lydian Spin with Timothy Seymour Dahl, episode
Yes.
number 92.
Wow. 92. I mean, that's like 92 just seems like a lot in general. I mean, last night we were talking Noam Chomsky's 92 and he still writes books. I mean,
pray to the goddess. It's not going to take that long for me to get to the Golden Gates. I mean, the Golden Gated Community. I do not mean Matt Gates, who I'd like to begin.
Who's getting more trouble.
The award this week for creepiest ass clown in Congress, and I know there's a lot of competition, naturally goes to that freak from Florida, Republic cunt, Matt Gates. Now, we know that the Justice Department is investigating him for allegedly paying women for sex and separately sleeping, possibly with a minor, and transporting her across state lines because he was busted transferring $900 via Venmo. Nobody ever said he was fucking smart. To his friend Joel Greenberg, who then proceeded to pay 3 young women. Now, Greenberg.
Those two had some kind of circle jerk thing going on.
Oh, wait, here it comes. So Greenberg is the former Seminole, or as I like to say, Seminole county tax collector. And a lawyer that actually encountered him during the labor dispute from a former colleague described him as if the Tiger King got elected tax collector. All right, now. So we know that Gates and him are butt buddies.
Oh, yeah.
Greenberg was indicted last year and has now been charged on 33 counts, including sex trafficking of a minor, bribery, stalking, and defrauding the Paycheck Protection Program, and providing investigators with information on an array of topics, including Mr. Freak himself, Florida man, Gates' activities for many months now. So Greenberg, that would be Joel, is currently in jail because he's so dumb. Okay. He violated his.
I thought he got the Trump. I thought he got the Trump.
Didn't get it. No, he violated his freaking probation. Okay. And he's already admitted that he's given cash or gifts in exchange for sex. But Greenberg's mother even ratted him out to the Florida Sentinel a couple of years ago and said that her son, that would be Joel Greenberg, that would be Gates' best friend, had been diagnosed as a child with attention deficit disorder. Ooh. He took medication as a child. He developed Tourette syndrome. He was belligerent, defiant, rebellious. That's just the beginning.
I mean, if you're cranked on pharma speed, can you call that Tourette syndrome at that point?
Well, they sent him to military school, and that didn't work out.
I'm sure that always works out.
Didn't work out too good. And as a young man, he was asked, what did he want to be when he grew up? And he said, a good person. I didn't help.
That's already, you can't be a good person if you're really trying to be a good person. I feel like that's just
please. Look, he went to Rollins College in Florida, but never graduated. His name appeared on a burglary incident report when he was 18 and on an involuntary psychiatric commitment report when he was 21.
Greenberg sounds kind of fun,
Well, supposedly, sex and drug parties, and everybody has to check their cell phone at the door and all that stuff.
It's like a swinger party. It's a swinger party.
You know what? There's nothing worse than an ugly swinger.
Yeah, that's most swingers pretty much. I mean, so what's the rule about this? Because obviously statutory rape, if you're having a relationship with or sexual relationship with a minor, they can charge you on that. But there's something about if you're doing that and then you cross state lines, it's somehow like that's much bigger deal. I don't know what that. I mean, that's what isn't that what Chuck Berry went down for? Because he had some like teenage girls when he was touring as an old rocker, and they bust him on this whole like trafficking of a minor.
But Greenberg has 33 counts against him, and he's talking like a canary. So
I assume he was crossing the Georgia-Florida line a lot.
No, they took some of these gals, might have been of age, might have not, still paying them for sex, to the Bahamas.
Yeah, I guess the Bahamas is a big hot spot for underage sex trafficking, slavery, whatever. That's the go-to, I guess.
Well, you know what? They could just go there and hire the gals that are there and willing and need the money instead of transporting some. I'm not sure. Whatever. It's ridiculous that, I'm more for women just outright robbing men, take their wallets and run. I mean, why do you have to blow them to get away with? Anyway, just say.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Whatever. Well,
go ahead, Tim.
Another shithead in the news today was Bernie Madoff died.
Thank the goddess.
Yeah, he did not fulfill his 150-year prison sentence.
He took down a lot of people. He really fucked royally.
Well, you know what though? This is, one thing he might have said that was correct. He's like, it's all a Ponzi scheme. They did have to throw a motherfucker under the bus because he just took he ruined so many people's fucking savings. It's over $60 billion. But just at that same time, you had Alan Greenspan basically admitted, I was wrong. But just a few years before the whole crash, he was saying, I don't believe in fraud. The markets just naturally check themselves. And it's like, well,
they naturally corrupt themselves.
Right.
And this is the way it's always freaking been. And so, you know what? I kind of can't blame Bernie because he was just doing what everybody else was fucking doing and what the government's doing all along, what the banks have been doing and the real estates have been doing. So what are you going to do? He just got busted.
Well, he tried to made off. He made. My grammar's too bad to pull that pun.
He made off with the goods.
Biden's pulling the troops in Afghanistan. Like, this is above my.
Oh, come on. Okay, I gotta.
At this point, like, wait a second. You supported all these things. Like, I actually don't even know what the real strategy is. I really don't know.
Nobody does, and of course, he wants it to be like around September 11th. But the thing is, we have done as Americans so much damage.
I know
to the entire region that it's just phenomenal. As if we didn't learn from Vietnam and everything that came before that. It's absolutely astonishing. And who knows which way to go or what to do? I have no idea.
Well, it kind of feels like when there's like an environmental disaster by like some big oil company or some big industrial company, and they do some kind of like settlement and like, okay, my hands are washed clean of this now, and then it's like thousands of years of damage is done. It's like, well, I don't even know what to say.
Well, I mean, look, we were dumb enough to go after the wrong places for crimes that were committed basically because of, as usual, the Saudis. And look, the little known facts about Afghanistan, and it's almost impossible to mine there. We are, as the Russians were, and probably next they're going to be the Chinese because they're stealing everything anyway, that is of natural resources out of Africa. That lithium, which powers every cell phone, iPad, and computer, they have an amazing amount of lithium there. And I don't mean the drug. And that's really what the fight has always been about.
Well, I'm wondering, my gears are just turning here. I'm wondering if the whole pharma opiate profit thing has jumped the shark. Like, it looks so bad that basically having access to all the fucking poppy shit in Afghanistan is actually less valuable now. I don't know. I'm making up my own conspiracy theory right now on the spot. But
why not? Everybody else does.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, look, finally, in a small moment, a sign perhaps from I don't know where, that corporations, who are also people according to some assholes, are doing something right for a change. Hundreds now, it was just a few dozen at first, of American chief executive companies, nonprofits, and others on Wednesday signed a statement opposing legislation that's made, and let's face it, Republicans in 43 states have introduced more than 250, I think it's up to 350 bills now that would make it harder to vote. Okay. In conjunction with the should have never been president, man who shall not be named, big lie that continues to this frickin' day. But I mean, we knew about Coca-Cola and Delta, but hundreds more, and including American Express, Goldman Sachs, Facebook, Amazon, Twitter, Google, Starbucks. They're all just going, this is finally madness. Well, it's just got to stop.
I mean, good luck, Republicans, going against baseball and Coca-Cola. I mean, that's just okay. But I honestly think fucking McConnell and Graham, they're just giving lip service to the Trump base, who basically has taken over the Republican Party. It's interesting seeing like established Democrats like just kind of holding on to these corporations, like, see, these are good things, and they're speaking out. Let's hug corporations here. Although the corporations are correct, I think they're correct. But it's kind of interesting that essentially this kind of virtue signaling of like hugging corporations is kind of blindsiding some of the progressive agendas here. I kind of like, I kind of feel like this is all part of some big strategy.
The interesting part about the double dipping dong dong of this is Republicans going, we're going to raise taxes on the corporations. Well, you know what? About fucking time, you assholes. So if they're getting pissed off because corporations are actually taking a stand for the right of the people, and then Republicans are saying we should tax the corporations who we know are not taxed enough, good on you. That's like kind of reverse psychology.
I mean, it is.
I like it.
It is bait and switch, though. I mean, yes, obstructing votes is immoral, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, to present the corporations as the heroes and the savior, it's just a hard pill for me to swallow, even though the fucking Republicans are just assholes with the whole voting obstruction.
All right, well, I saw a kind of interesting 10-part series, which is so apropos to these times, especially while I'm hoarse from yelling at the TV as the as I like to say, chauvinist trial is going, and his defense attorneys are so fucking dumb and boring and so ridiculous. So I'm a little bit hoarse from screaming at the TV.
Oh, boy.
But apropos to this, I watched a 10-part series called Them, all capital letters.
I want to see it.
And I have to say, it was very interesting at first, the first few episodes, but it's about a first Black family moving into East Compton when it was all white, prejudiced, ignorant assholes. And not only are they terrorized by the neighbors and the banks and the real estate agents, but also by this bit of haunting that's going on to all of the family members. And there's a really interesting evil Black minstrel that the main character, the dad, has communication with. And I have to say, by the end, it's so brutal and so horrifying because, and as white folk, we got no idea. And the thing is, with Black people, men especially, getting shot every freaking other day, including 10 miles from the fucking Chauvin trial, just by a woman who supposedly for 26 years was training other cops. And she taser, and still pulls her gun. This is just, so out of control.
What can't people learn lessons here? I mean, just the sensitivity of this trial alone. You think about Rodney King and all the shit that can happen. Weren't the fucking police chiefs going around to all the different police departments in the metropolitan area of the Twin Cities being like, just cool it a little bit for a couple of days? I mean, what the
Well, fuck? I mean, the chief of police and a lot of his, fellow officers all said it was ridiculous what he did. And I'm going to have to quote, because I think this was pretty cool, George Clooney for a minute, who said, why doesn't somebody kneel on his neck for 9 minutes and 20? Say, you know what? I'm volunteering. Anyway.
Oh my God.
How about some interesting, cool news? Because, I'm kind of I've moved many times. I'm a nomad, but architecture is,
you have an architecture story?
I do. And this could, because, as both a nomad and somebody that likes to move a lot, this could actually be benefiting us in the very near future, Timothy, because maybe we'll have some Adobe side by side. Now, giant 3D printers, yes.
Oh, printing houses.
Construction are making housing more affordable in Austin, Texas, where a 33-foot long machine, now I don't have a backyard, so it wouldn't fit in it, but that's okay, recently squeezed out the walls of tiny new houses for people who were once chronically homeless. Now, hang on, let's take it one step further.
Yes.
An Italian architectural firm is experimenting with a way to potentially make the process less expensive and better for climate by using what's readily available? Local soil. So over the past few weeks near Ravenna, I've played there many times. I don't know if you have Italy. Multiple 3D printers have slowly laid down layers of earth, and they're making these really cool dome-shaped houses out of dirt. And not only do they look cool, but skylights, they're architecturally strong, thick walls, insulation, and they look really good. Come on, people.
That's cool. That's cool. I mean,
I'm digging it.
I'm down with the 3D house.
Look, I fear the cardboard box under a freeway pass eventually, but I'm going to settle for putting my mind on a 3D printer, making me an Adobe house of dirt somewhere. I don't know where. Just saying. Anyway.
Well, speaking of houses, I'm going to talk about some trailer houses here. There was an incident. Unfortunately, Barney Harris, who was a local hero gym teacher, basketball coach at Union Academy in Monroe, North Carolina. It must have been his brother-in-law, but he got the drug dealer bug. He thought like, oh, cool, I can make a little money on the side. Well, he got in way over his head, and he and his brother-in-law decided to go into this trailer park and invade this stash house owned by the Sonoma New Generation drug cartel. Well, that thing was guarded, and there was basically a Bonnie and Clyde fucking amount of bullets just destroyed this fucking local gym teacher to pieces. So
Bonnie and Claude.
If you don't know what you're doing, don't sell drugs. If you do know what you're doing, I don't know. That's up to you.
Don't go after a cartel that already exists.
I don't think they knew. I don't think they knew what was going on. They just
you know what? It's dangerous ground. Well, Tim, I had to steal this story from you because sometimes I occasionally slip you one or two animal stories. I had to keep this one to myself because it's not about an animal. It's about an insect. Now, I almost died, many times, 3 times from freaking spider bites. Now, I always thought it was because in like the late 70s, I had a poster with my tarantula on my chest and the children have come. I didn't even get bitten by mosquitoes. I didn't know I was allergic to spiders. However, I still love them. Now,
oh boy.
Scientists from the US have managed to translate a spider's web into music.
That's cool. It's like
oh my God, which experts believe will allow us to talk to spiders. I don't even.
Well, that's a strange connection.
Well, let me finish. Okay. The project's principal investigator, Marcus Bueller, PhD, has given the following explanation. The spider lives in an environment of vibrating strings. They don't see very well, so they sense their world through vibrations, which have different frequencies.
That makes sense.
These vibrations may occur when the spider stretches a silk strand or when it's building or catches a fly or even the wind. So the music, and you can go to spider web sonification during construction on YouTube. And it sounds like harp music. It's really pretty amazing.
I mean, but that's what do you mean it sounds? I mean, it's what you assign to it. So, because I know like when Dave Buddy was studying with Charles Warren, he was using fractal geometry to work out his kind of serialist formulas. I mean, basically you can take any kind of geometry and apply pitch, rhythm schemes, all that stuff, but I understand like how they can get.
All right, well,
it's basically what you assign to it. So
well, let me fill you in. So the music was composed using the frequency of a vibrating web with different frequencies of sound, a sound assigned to separate strands. So this was achieved by scanning a natural spider web with a laser, capturing 2D cross sections, and then using computer algorithms to reconstruct the 3D network of the web. I'm telling you, it sounds pretty amazing, and I just wonder what a water bug sounds like.
I think the idea sounds amazing. I'm just saying you could have a completely different final product depending on what you throw into that whole algorithm, but it doesn't matter. It's a great idea.
Go ahead and try it. But in the meantime, spider web sonification during construction, YouTube. It's like a 9-minute orchestra of spider web spinning.
Cool.
Fantastic. It's great. Okay.
That's cool. Valentina Tomashki of Spring Hill, Florida. This is kind of tragic, but so they're, they have all these like lightning storms all the time and Florida. So a tree comes down. She's driving around the tree. It took down a power line, and then part of her car catches on fire. So she's like, "Oh my God!" She jumps out. I made it. Something just out of the Looney Tunes. I made it, and then she steps on the live wire and basically explodes. So
look. I mean, people don't understand that there are a few things more dangerous than lightning strikes, and they happen more frequently than anybody realizes. I mean, I just, for instance, heard today on the news that the blood clots from the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and by the way, America has had an absolutely incredible uprise. Idiots not wearing masks, spring break, college students, etc. Bars with no mask. an incredible uprise in the last few weeks, and so has India. But anyway,
Brazil, a lot of places are going nuts.
All right, so but lightning strikes, pretty dangerous. And so the comment I heard was that with the Johnson & Johnson, because 6 women got blood clots, 1 died, and they compared it to lightning strikes and said, you're more likely to get hit by lightning because let's face it, 1 person dies.
I think the stat was like, it was like a 1 and X amount of million chance that you'd have this like blood clot. I mean, I thought we all just kind of prepared, like, okay, we kind of rushed these through. There's going to be some collateral damage.
All right, but how about all the thrombosis they used to threaten on long distance plane rides? Come on, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
All right, well, look,
yes.
Do you have something before I tie it up with a story about Russia before we lead into our Russian guest, Slava Mogutin?
You did give me the trained monkey story in India that we're going to. They're intimidating people coming out of the bank and taking their cash.
No, to tell.
Yeah. So 3 guys got arrested in New Delhi. I guess they train these monkeys to go up and harass people leaving like a bank until I don't know how they conclude, like, hey, I guess I'll hand over my cash and you're gonna leave me alone, which they would.
Well, so monkeys are very clever thieves. Yeah.
Yes, but they went up against a lawyer who's like, you're not getting my fucking money. So these guys,
the monkeys testify.
Probably not. I don't know if we have time, but my dad had pet monkeys before he met my mom, because he had this scientist friend, this guy Irv, who was actually ended up being killed by a grizzly bear in Wyoming. But it's true. You can look it up. I
don't need to. I trust everything you say.
All right. So,
it's weird because I just had a dream about a monkey that had a miniature monkey that I rarely dream. I don't sleep long enough to dream. I had a miniature monkey that fit in the palm of my hand who in the sunlight.
I think you told me.
Had a sheen of pink. Carry on.
Well, these are squirrel monkeys. They're called squirrel monkeys. There's kind of skinny, long tails, and there's like hyperactive. They're kind of like the monkey version of a greyhound. They're just like bouncing off the walls like crazy. So anyhow, Irv, he was a scientist, and his wife, Yolanda, was basically like, either they go or I go, because these things, they like the person that feeds them, the host, and then they basically hate everyone else.
All right, Tim, I have to ask you.
Yeah.
Because I actually met some men on a train that tried to invite me to their place in India because I'd asked them, they were Indian, if they'd ever seen a giant Indian squirrel, which are multicolored like rainbows. Things. I mean, I didn't even know they existed. And, I do love my furry friends. They are more colorful than parrots. They grow giant, and they are the multicolored large squirrels of India. Anyway, I'm invited whenever. Sure, I'm going now.
Well, those sound terrifying. So I'll wrap up this monkey story, even though it's not even the original monkey story. So my dad had these fucking things. Emo and Ajax were their names. It is before I was born, and I think it was like my mom started dating him right around that time, but they had to be taken away too, because every time my mom would come over for like their dates, like they'd throw their feces at her and just really insane. But they had this like, they could kind of behave when my dad's around. They were obsessed with mayonnaise, and it was like spinach for Popeye. I mean, they'd just go insane for mayonnaise, to the point where they figure out how to like open the fridge and then like with their 2 paws, kind of like a thumb and index finger, like kind of like start rotating the cap, because these monkeys aren't that big, and screwing it off. And it's like he'd come home and it'd be like mayonnaise and shit everywhere. It was a nightmare.
Yeah, what I don't get is your dad had monkeys and then he decided to have some freaking kids. I don't get that wasn't a lesson.
They only lasted a couple of weeks before I think he donated them to the zoo. Look, I don't think it didn't really last very long.
You may have thrown feces at your mother, but it was probably verbal, not physical.
Yeah. I don't have no recollection of that.
Tie it up, Timmy. Now here we go.
You tie it up. I think you have
going to. Yes. Here we go. So this is in honor and for the horrifaction of our guest this evening, Slava Mogutin, a Russian artist. So there is a Russian artist now, female, 27 years old, who is facing 6 years in prison. Her name is Yulia Svetkova for her very, very amateur drawings of women showing their vagina. No, please. I mean, this
That's
is not
so stupid.
photographs. So a Russian court has opened the trial up for, she's a feminist artist, of course, and all she's trying to do is make comic-like drawings so women can get over the stigma of their body. She founded an online group, right, which is also being targeted. And it's just like recently that, again, as if it's not constricted enough, that Putin signed constitutional amendments that outlawed same-sex marriage and tasked the government with preserving traditional family values. Now, fortunately, Amnesty International has stepped in to her case, and it's just becoming an international outrage. And as I've told you before, I mean, Paradoxia was translated into Russian and released, and the publisher was constantly just imprisoned, institutionalized. I mean, he translated many other books as well. And but the topper was when a friend of him came to one of my last shows in Russia and said, he got out of prison. He was in it for 5 years for having a band that sounded like the Seeds.
Oh, boy.
So it just goes to show you, the world can be run by frickin' dicks. But in some countries, you can't show a drawing of a little puss without facing repercussions. Not my world. I just like to talk about it. This is the Lydian Spin with Tim Dahl, episode number 92, and Slava Mogutin, our guest.
They built the wall. They built the box, they built the shop, they built the mall. Mr. Clean and Dirty Harry, the outcast becomes birds' food. On its own, the coyote's survival rate almost halves. It's a bluff, but it works for now. Romulus and Remus are locked in the blood fight, but never mind, that's all right. The beach has a new master, fucker in charge. No easy meal.
This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and Slava Mogutin, a exile artist, poet, photographer, journalist, filmmaker from Russia, who's now been living in. What the
heck is that? This is like, wow. I hope that was recorded. At first I thought you were doing it, and then I was like, there's just no way she could be that consistent.
I didn't hear it at all. I didn't hear it from.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Shall I begin again? Thank you. This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and Slava Mogutin, who is an artist wearing many hats, photographer, poet, journalist, filmmaker, maybe a go-go dancer in a previous life, I'm not sure. A Russian expat chased out of Russia to save his life some years ago, now living in New York. Welcome to the show, Slava.
Thank you, Lydia. Thank you, Tim. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure.
What's going on right now, darling? What's happening that now COVID is easing up? How are you feeling right now that spring has sprung?
Well, I'm working on a bunch of projects as always. Couple of book projects. One is based on my Polaroid work shot over the past few years in between LA, New York, and Berlin. And another one is a bilingual book of poetry based on my recent texts written in my native tongue and in English.
Do you usually write your poetry in your native tongue or in English? I mean, you've read me some of your poetry in English. I have no idea what it sounds like in Russian, but it sounds great in English. So does your mind work in separate territories depending on the material, or how does that work?
Well, I started out as a poet and journalist when I was a teenager, and actually my first self-identification was primarily as a poet and journalist, and I still consider myself as such more than any other avenues of my self-expression. And I've been writing poetry pretty much my entire life, and there was a period when I stopped writing in Russian at the time when I moved to New York, and actually it coincided with me being awarded one of the most prestigious literary prizes in Russia, called the Andrei Bely Prize.
What year was that?
That was year 2000.
So you had left Russia by then?
I left Russia. It was 5 years after I was kicked out of Russia, and
Okay.
it was ironic because it was by far my most radical book of poetry, and it was called Superhuman Supertext, and was written under the pen name Super Mogutin, and was kind of a very Nietzsche kind of character that was like a superman or Superman. And I was very much inspired by Nietzsche, and it was I created this character who was kind of like a source of all evils in the world and the most depraved monster in the history of Russian literature. And ironically enough, this was the book that got me this important, in fact, the most important unofficial literary prize in Russia.
Could you buy that book in Russia?
As far as I know, all my books in Russian are out of print. I did publish one book of English translations in the US, and that book is also out of print, but I'll be happy to read some text from it. It's called Food Chain. It was published by a small publisher called Titna Press years ago, and I'm not sure.
But was any of your work banned? I mean, tell us a little bit about, being in Russia about to, be kicked out. What exactly was going on? What were you doing then? How old were you?
I started writing and publishing my work when I was about 16, and actually had to lie about my age in order to get published. My father is kind of an established writer and journalist who published several books for children, and he's a born-again Christian, so he's kind of like the opposite of my own path. I was basically the first openly gay journalist in the mainstream press because, I was talking openly about my sexuality at the time when it was still considered a criminal offense punishable by 5 years in jail. So it was just to give you the context of the time when I started out, at the time when I first moved to Moscow as a teenager. And
what year was that, Slava?
that was around 1990, 91.
The stigma of being a homosexual, I think, in a lot of cultures in the world, that's there's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of people feel like they have to put it in the closet. But I couldn't imagine having a backdrop where you could potentially serve 5 years in prison for being a homosexual. Usually people experience their first sexual experiences, unless you're molested or something, pretty young and stuff like that. As a boy that's developing and you're having these different thoughts and that pressure, I mean, were you very aware or were you, how scary was that is basically what I'm getting at.
Especially with a born-again Christian, allow me to say, asshole father who's writing children's books, but not taking care of his own children very well. And then the father of the country being the evil monster that I'm not even sure your literature could top.
Right. Well, it's a very good point. A lot of the work I did was kind of against the system and certainly against my upbringing and against homophobia that prevailed at that time in the Russian mass media, because actually a lot of newspapers and magazines started covering gay community, but it was always from the very tabloid and kind of scandalous and negative perspective. And I was one of the first people who came out in the country of 180 million people, and it was very ironic that I managed to get published at the time when, again, this was considered a crime. And coincidentally, you hear the sirens, police sirens.
They're coming for you.
Yeah. They want to drown you out. Did you get death threats? What kind of threats started happening? Or did you beating people physically trying to assault you?
I was gay bashed on several occasions, but it wasn't for my sexual orientation because it was just the time when people had very narrow-minded perspective. Just having long hair and earrings could get you in trouble with
Okay. I always felt like gay bachelors were, I mean, it's a cliche, but I always felt like they're closeted homosexuals
I
themselves.
think that's very much the point. And actually, I never made the secret of my sexuality. In fact, I was telling Lydia the story that I never really came out, but I was in love with a girl and with a boy pretty much at the same time. And I was kind of dating both of them at the same time.
A couple, or
No, this
independent?
was when I was in school. So it was like, I was like in my early teens when I
But you were still living in Siberia then? Were you still living at you?
I grew up in Siberia, but actually my family moved around a lot, and it was one of those places where we ended up after moving from Siberia. But I was a young kid when I left Siberia, and I have very vague recollections about my Siberian childhood. But eventually, I ended up in Moscow as a teenager, and I pretty much left my family after my parents divorced when I was 13. And ever since, I pretty much lived independently from my parents.
From the time you were 13?
Yes, I moved to Moscow. I lived in a dormitory, and I was getting a small stipend as a student, and also working some like part-time jobs, and just supporting myself. I started supporting myself with journalism when I turned 16.
An amazing accomplishment, especially in Russia.
I know, and also, again, considering the subject matter of my work, that was also very, very controversial by that time. Going back to your question, it did result in continuous harassment from the authorities and death threats, and me being under 24/7 surveillance, and 2 criminal cases being opened as a result of my journalism.
So you're supporting yourself by journalism, you're getting published, you're winning poetry awards, you're under surveillance, you have death threats.
I was on television. I had my own TV show at some point, and I was working as an editor in one of the first independent publishing houses.
Did you have anyone that was at a higher position that stood up for you publicly? That was actually by your side as the threats were kind of slowly clamping on you?
I was very fortunate because the most prominent human rights lawyer in Russia, Andrei Bely, who was representing a lot of dissidents, even going back to the Soviet times, took on my case, and he pretty much was one of those figures in Russia that if he represents you, it's kind of a guarantee that at least, you know, they won't kill you or just make you disappear.
So how is he still alive?
Again, because he's one of those rare figures in Russian history. He was representing a lot of very famous dissidents going back 40, 50 years.
Okay.
And
the first time I went to Russia, there was only 2 TV channels. There was a fire burning and there were cartoons. And I went with the group Die Haut to play some gigs, and the government, I don't know what that means, bought all the tickets for soldiers. Needless to say, Tim, a soldier in any type of uniform, I can seduce into getting what I wanted, and I had one steal another cop's hat for a bar of chocolate and a kiss on the cheek.
You know, when I was there with Lydia, I don't know, 7 years ago in Moscow, there was a guy that made his way backstage who was an old bookstore owner, maybe owned a couple stores, and he said he had gone.
No, it was a publisher.
He was a publisher. He had gone to jail. I thought he was a distributor. Maybe he was a publisher. He went to jail, but didn't he distribute your books? I thought he said he was selling your books.
He translated my book, and William Burroughs and Aleister Crowley, and he'd been to prison many times. And the guy that he came with said, "Yeah, I just got out of prison. I was there for 5 years." And I said, "For what?" And he goes, "I had a band that sounded like the Seeds."
Oh, wow. There you go.
And the publisher of my book, I forget the name of the label right now, because my book is banned in Russia, Paradoxia, even though they published it. But they had thrown the publisher in jail and in institutions numerous times, and would just come and raid his house for no reason, because he was one of the most outlandish publishers there. But he would not stop. Every time he got out of jail, he'd find someone else to translate. That's the dedication you have to have in a place like Russia. Otherwise, you're just another one of the people accepting the bullshit.
In my case, I guess I was a very young and in some ways naive person. I did believe that you can change the system by just speaking your mind and just speaking from your heart. You know, this all I did was just being brutally honest about my own story and about the story of the community that I thought I was representing. And
so when was the breaking point when you said, that's it, I really have got to get out of here right now? And is that when the civil rights lawyer found you, or you found them?
that was the point when there was one criminal case against me that was for malicious hooliganism with extreme violence. And that's the same criminal charges that were used against Pussy Riot and routinely used against dissidents back in the Soviet time. So that case was closed, and then shortly afterwards, in 1993, I staged the first same-sex marriage attempt with my then American partner. And we went to the American embassy and got, surprisingly, because you had to have like an official permission from the American side, because it was an international marriage attempt. It was completely lunatic and crazy thing to do, because in retrospect, if I knew what would happen afterwards, obviously, you know, I would probably think twice about doing that. But we did send out a press release, because my boyfriend had a fax machine, and we sent out press releases to each and every news agency and newspaper we could get a hold of. And we didn't know what to expect at all. So when we got the permission from the first consul of the American embassy, that was a huge surprise, because he was aware that this was supposed to be marriage between two men at the time when it wasn't legal anywhere else in the world, including America. So that was a big surprise. And we did manage to stage that attempt at the official office for international unions in Moscow. And we were greeted by a huge crowd of journalists. Actually, that attempt made headlines around the world, but that's when the harassment really escalated overnight, and we started getting late night visits from the undercover security officers who were basically telling us, we can throw you to jail or psychiatric clinic. No one will see you ever again if you continue doing what you're doing. It was just pure and total harassment. And there was another criminal case that was about to be opened against me. And that's when my lawyer told me, it was like, you know, if you have any chance to just go abroad and sit it out somehow, it would be the best thing, because he was basically telling me that my choice was either try to fight the system and spend the few years of my life fighting just to be out of jail, or escape prosecution altogether and start my life.
Or possibly disappeared in the middle of the night.
Right.
Which happens all the time, and still in Russia.
And honestly, if this happened under Putin, I don't think I would be able to.
So this was Yeltsin at the time, right? Boris Yeltsin was.
There was a brief period when there was some room for this kind of actions, public.
But so was Boris Yeltsin was the minister at the time when this was happening?
Yeah, the first.
He was president at the time. So because at the same time, there's a lot of action going on in Russia. You're having this kind of transformation, kind of new generation of oligarchs, this kind of just handing over of resources to these just elite minority of guys. So I'm wondering, with all this action going on, some would even call it looting, you're somehow popping through the cracks, and they're actually you're setting off alarms somehow.
This was a period when a lot of things just happened in a very short period of time.
Right.
And in retrospect, right. I do remember that time was a sense of nostalgia, because it wasn't just because I was young and completely fearless, but also at the time, everything seemed possible, because
Wild West. was like a wild west.
Exactly. And I also saw the whole system of communism collapsing in front of my very eyes. I was on the barricades when Yeltsin took power and the Soviet Union disintegrated. It was a brief period of freedom when all these underground subcultures came to the surface, and my first pictures were taken at underground rock clubs and punk concerts, and all those bands couldn't perform legally at the Soviet time, but all of a sudden they became huge celebrities and had giant audiences and packed stadiums, stuff like this. So I think underground culture was largely responsible for bringing down that old communist structure. What came as a replacement, unfortunately, was this gangster capitalism that allowed unprecedented corruption, and also paved the way to Putin's dictatorship, because people just were so sick and tired of this lawlessness and the fact that Yeltsin was drunk.
Yes, well, yeah, those notorious phone calls to Bill Clinton, like the missiles are on the way.
And exactly, and all of this was allowed to happen because of the Clinton foreign policy. They wanted to have a puppet in the Kremlin, and again, as a result, now we have Putin in power, and he's not going anywhere.
He's not going anywhere. And also Bill Clinton lied. I mean, he promised that he wasn't going to expand NATO or the West, and then immediately they did. And well, that's a whole other thing.
All right. So you decided it was necessary. You had to go. Were you already interested in what was going on in America? Did you have access to information about other artists that were happening? And then as well, how did you actually get to America? And what happened when you first got here?
Well, again, it was just by pure circumstance. At that time, I was in a relationship with an American artist, Robert Filippini, who happened to be a member of Fucked Up and Queer Nation. So the whole marriage attempt was pretty much his idea. And I thought to myself, wow, nothing like this has ever been done in Russia. We thought of it as a conceptual art performance, but also based on the very personal story. And I think that was the appeal of that action for a lot of people in Russia and abroad. It's because of Robert. Also, I was offered political asylum in France because one of my best friends in Moscow was the cultural attaché of the French embassy. And she was just saying, oh, why are you going to America? It's so far away, and just around the corner, you can come back next month or next year. And I thought to myself, I don't know, I've been to Paris already, and it's kind of like very old school. I want to go to America because that's, I was very much interested in American counterculture. And in fact, thanks to my ex, Robert, I was introduced to people like Allen Ginsberg and William Burroughs and Henry Miller and David Wojnarowicz and a lot of other my heroes that, some of them I was lucky to meet, people like.
There's a fantastic David Wojnarowicz documentary out now.
Right. Yeah.
Released on Kino. He is one of my favorite artists as well.
Right.
So carry on. You come to America.
So I was just basically really eager to come to America. And
what year was that then?
It was 95. And at that point, I pretty much knew that I had to act really fast because the new criminal charges were on the way. And again, it was just a matter of luck, the fact that at that point, the computer system wasn't fully implemented at the border. And I basically just managed to escape, and I had an invitation from Harriman Institute at Columbia University as an exchange student, and they also invited me to do some lectures about new Russian media, which I did, and that was a perfect excuse for me to go to New York, and that's how I ended up here.
Amazing. When we talked last, I can't remember because we had interviewed Mark Ames from the Exile, the English paper that Matt Taibbi and him were involved with, and they were pushed out, I think, a few years later. But
In Moscow.
In Moscow, but did you have interactions with them at all?
It's interesting because I was one of the contributing writers, editors for the Moscow News, which was the first English language publication, which was one of the most liberal papers at the time. Also the Moscow Guardian, which was excellent, and I was publishing something in most of the issues of both papers. But actually Mark Ames came later, and I did see his newspaper, and a bunch of my friends were his colleagues and contributors to Exile. Yeah, I think what he was doing in Russia was also kind of unprecedented.
Yes, and then he had to leave. He left before Matt Taibbi, who he got out. Matt had ran into more problems by trying to stay.
Right.
But it's one of those things where it's like, do you want to be a martyr and sacrifice yourself, or do you want to just continue to live?
Again, it was just a matter of time, because several people tried to repeat the same kind of performance that I did back in '93 with the same-sex marriage.
Yep. I think I remember some of those.
At least 2 or 3 attempts, and all those people ended up in trouble, and I believe there were criminal charges in most of those cases. So what's happening now in Russia obviously is a huge reversal to the time of total control and total dictatorship, and I have a lot of issues with the Russian government. But I always say that, in my view, Russia is no more homophobic than any other country. It's just the government that creates this hostile environment. And I still have a huge audience. In fact, I was just offered to do a huge museum show in Moscow, and I was really shocked and surprised to find out that they actually have venue, and especially such huge venue, that would be interested in showing my work. But I just feel like it has so much to do with the fact that I made a name for myself in America. They want to have people like me back in Russia.
Well, the thing is, you don't want your art confiscated, and you don't want to go there with your art so that you're confiscated.
Right. Well, it's a good point, but at the same time, I haven't been in Russia in many years, and now I'm a US citizen. So I believe if I was going as a tourist, there would be way more reasons for me to worry about my safety and freedom, as if I'm actually going with an official invitation from such big institution, because they also don't want any martyrs as well,
Get to New York. Did you know anybody here? Did you know of people here? What's the first moves you made? You get here, Columbia, you're working with Columbia University. How do you even find an apartment? What goes on?
Again, all of this was pretty much because of my ex, Robert, who did have a place in New York. At that time, he was renting it out to Wolfgang Tillmans, actually, one of my favorite artists and photographers. But we did find another place, and it was on the Lower East Side. And it was an incredible loft, but I didn't know a lot of people. My English was really poor. So I felt very much isolated my first, I would say, couple years. I did meet people like Eileen Miles and Allen Ginsberg, and both of whom helped me to get my political asylum, because it was a very long process, because at that time, officially, there was actually the best relationship between Russia and America at the time when drunken Yeltsin was in office. And not surprisingly so. It was a 600-page case that I had to present. I had to translate a lot of my journalism into English to give an idea of what actually led to my prosecution by the authorities. And Allen Ginsberg and Eileen Miles helped organize a letter from Pan American Club in support of my application, and then also Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. And
So amazing. So amazing. How lucky for you, my friend.
Did you have any time to do your work during all this? I mean, it seems like that would just take over everything.
I did know a few friends that were my ex's friends, and most of them were very politically involved people from Korean, ACT UP and Korean Nation. So that was my kind of political upbringing in my first 2 years in the US, and also gave me enough time to think over everything that happened to me in Russia and be very grateful that I managed to end up in a country like the US, and also getting my political asylum together was a full-time job.
Yeah.
So
Did you learn English just by speaking it and being here? Did you have to study it? It must be a wide divide between Russian and English.
I was learning English and translating from English around the same time. And that was the best practice for me, because my goal was to have a book of Allen Ginsberg published in Russia. And I did manage to publish some of his most controversial poems in Russian for the very first time. And also I published books of William Burroughs for the first time in Russian, and translated Dennis Cooper and a few other people into Russian. So this was kind of my main exercise. And also, of course, meeting a lot of people in New York, and that gave me confidence to start eventually writing English. And also at that time, I was still working for several Russian magazines and newspapers, and that also gave me access to a lot of events in New York. Also, I did feel very much connected with my Russian audience, because it was a sea change for me between being this crazy, controversial, underground celebrity in Russia and coming to New York and virtually being completely anonymous. So it was a very interesting experience. And that experience as an immigrant and refugee and exile and dissident was crucial in my formation as an artist and as a person. And I still remember the day when I managed to escape Russia. It was March 15, and I celebrated.
Oh, we just passed the celebration, the anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
There's a lot of culture shock a lot of times when people move to the United States, and say, even if you grew up during communism, and then just seeing just the hyper capitalism and marketing just bombarded by all the time. But what about the contrast in homosexual cultures from being underground to suddenly being in cities like New York, maybe San Francisco, LA, where you have these safe havens for the gay community, which can be extremely flamboyant, completely celebratory and super loud. And how did that feel for you as a contrast to being anonymous or trying to be undercover in Russia?
As I said, my first 2 years, I spent mostly observing and thinking over a lot of things, and writing a lot of things, and translating a lot of things, and just trying to start my life and career from scratch. And it was the most challenging but also very exciting experience, because I realized that I don't want to be this. First of all, Russian diaspora in New York and in America in general is traditionally very, very conservative, Republican, homophobic, and it basically represents the worst of Russia, if you ask me. So I didn't feel much connection. With few exceptions, I didn't really connect with the Russian diaspora, and I couldn't see my future in writing in foreign language and living in a foreign country. I wanted to be something else, entirely different. And actually, this was a very creative and constructive experience. But as far as gay community, actually, my first time in America was in 1991, I believe. It was in San Francisco. I was an exchange student, and it was at the height of AIDS epidemic. And that had a very, very chilling effect on me because I saw streets being just wiped out and newspapers filled with obituaries page after page after page. So that kind of made me very guarded against, this like going completely crazy, when I first moved to New York and actually decided that I'm going to stay here. I did have that experience from San Francisco from years ago in the back of my mind as a reminder that freedom has its price,
What was your first art show in New York? What did that involve? Was it photography? Tell me about that, and where was it?
Well, it was, I would say, when was it? I think it was around 2000, 2001. It was about 5 years that it took me. In fact, by that time, I met some of my heroes. I mentioned Allen Ginsberg, then there was Bruce, Gus Van Sant, Quentin Crisp, Larry Clark. The list goes on, and Terry Richardson, Albert Watson, a lot of people that photographed me, and I ended up showing them my pictures from years ago. And I still continued with photography, but I had no confidence at all in my visual work. And then there were several people like Terry Richardson and Bruce who were very encouraging, and they saw my pictures, and Terry was actually one of the first people who said, wow, this is really racist stuff. You should absolutely get it published and shown. And to me, that was very encouraging because, as I said, those were my heroes and people that I actually looked up to. And my first show was around year 2000, 2001, and I started with portraiture and nudes. Eventually, I started taking pictures consciously on a daily basis. I always set my camera. In fact, I had a bunch of point and shoot 35 millimeter cameras that I would just, sometimes I just use them up and I would just take another one. So I was constantly taking pictures. And also I was traveling a lot. As soon as I got my political asylum and green card, I started traveling, and a lot of my pictures, the best pictures I took while traveling. My main focus was always photojournalism, and it was focused on youth subcultures, on counterculture in general.
So you've taken all these risks, okay? And Terry Richardson, who's been canceled, quote unquote. These are some that's taken you in. You're seeing things like the homosexual culture becoming more the mainstream, and then you're seeing kind of this, what was once a counterculture, this kind of policing and this kind of almost fascism rising around some of these things. How does that feel to you? And of course, that's not universal, but we're seeing some elements of that happening. How does that feel to you as someone who's had to fight so much and who's been tolerant to maybe racy and extreme expression, even if it's not necessarily what's considered moral or ethical to some people? How do you feel in today's environment now when you're seeing cancel culture and all that kind of stuff after you've had to really stand up for yourself and get to where you are?
I'll quote Rimbaud by saying, morality is a type of brain disease. That's what I think. Morality is a type of brain disease. And what's happening now is it's basically cultural revisionism. And I think that's the real transgression, is what's happening with cancel culture and whatnot. But again, being an immigrant and dissident and exile, I think it gives you a certain angle that you can compare your previous experience to your present one. And also I felt like I paid my dues in this country to be able to criticize the evils of America in the same way as I criticize the evil.
Sure.
Well, and unfortunately, the cancel culture hasn't really seemed to yet hit the queer community in an artistic or fulfilling way.
It's really hard, to be honest with you.
Yes.
A lot of people I know are really watching. They're like working on
tenterhooks.
It's definitely something to reflect upon and think about. But again, I can only compare it with the experience of basically sex panic and certain aspect of homophobia and sexophobia in general. I talk about it in each and every interview. I've been censored in America by now way more than I have ever been in Russia, and this is something again to think about.
Outrageous.
And this kind of situation when corporations police the content that they thrive on and build their riches on, it's basically the story of the capitalist serpent.
Yeah, the biggest censor on TV are the advertisers, who are basically the corporations that don't want to offend any of their potential buyers. Yeah, so that's interesting, and also just because you've been on the right side of history with certain aspects doesn't mean you're exempt of criticism for the rest of your fucking life. That's what's so amazing is it is a anti-sex. It is a new wave of Puritanism.
Years ago, I did a book called NYC Go-Go, and it was all shot documentary style in downtown gay venues, clubs, bars. And it happened because my ex-boyfriend was a go-go dancer and bartender, and I had access to backstage to all these seedy parties. And also it was kind of a celebration of old New York that I saw the last glimpse of when I first moved here in the mid-90s, and it was pretty much destroyed by Giuliani
right
by the time when this book was published. And this book would never be possible ever.
Right.
Yeah. Reason number one, social media. Reason number two, cancel culture. Reason number three is because everyone is self-censoring, and self-censorship, in my view, is way worse than what Giuliani did and what
good point.
People propagate in cancel culture trying to do.
When did you meet Ron Athey? Speak about somebody who has been canceled by the NEA, National Endowment for the Arts, at the same time that Karen Finley and a few other people were some decades ago, but he rose out of that. When did you meet our good friend Ron Athey?
I've known Ron. Actually, he was one of the very first time I did a movie with Bruce. It was called Skin Flick, and actually that's how I met Terry Richardson also, because Terry's former wife Nikki Uberti played my girlfriend in the movie, and I played this bisexual skinhead, and the role was pretty much based on myself because Bruce was and still is a dear friend of mine, and he incorporated my poetry into the movie, and a lot of my dialogues come from real life. So we came to LA, Bruce and I think it was in 1999, to present that movie, and Gus Van Sant was introducing it at the Directors Guild of America. One of them was
unbelievable.
In Hollywood. I know. Who knew? That was long before cancel culture.
Yes.
Let's just put it this way.
And Ron was there?
And Ron, Ron and I met. We became friends, and I ended up staying at Ron's house. So we're talking, 22 years ago. And then I was a part of Ron's and Vaginal Davis's festival, Platinum Oasis, both in LA and in Birmingham, UK.
I was part of one of the Platinum Oasis as well. I did an installation based on Emilio Cabiero's life and his house. Platinum Oasis was when Ron Athey rented a motel and gave each different artist a room to decorate with whatever. So I dedicated it to my dear dead friend, Emilio Cabiero. I don't know if you were at the same one or not.
I don't remember. I remember there was Rick Owens doing the rope before he came, like he was doing the ropes for everyone. And
I don't remember either.
It was like a drug sex fest. Again, nothing like this would ever be possible. It took place at the infamous Coral Sands Motel, described by John Ritchie in one of the City of Night, I think, or one of the numbers, I forgot.
So it was like a very seedy place. And I remember in the middle of the night, everyone was high as fuck. Like, Ron was like, shut down your doors, like you have to lock your doors, the cops are here. So we like all like stumbled back into our rooms, and then it's like the inspection was over and we continued. It was incredible. Again, fun times before the cancel culture. So that's how I met Ron. But going back to censorship, I honestly think this whole movement is simply not sustainable because it harms all of us. And I think it's just very hypocritical on all accounts, because it just, to me, reading some of those, or reading or hearing some of those accounts, they just don't add up. I'm sorry, but it's like, you know.
What's amazing to me is this about cancel culture, guys. It's extremely, look, not that it doesn't happen elsewhere. It's very American for this reason, where there is not enough cancel culture about mass shootings, about too many fucking guns, about Republicans ruining everybody's life. It's about sex. And again, America is so pro-violence because we can do nothing because we're already, violence in any form is fine. Sex, because it is a puritanical country, no matter what happened in the 60s and 70s, it still is at its heart a mass murdering, hate of the individual, prejudice, right-wing, puritanical place that we still have to and will continue to fight as individuals who transgress against this moral bullshit, as you quoted, morality, a disease of the fucking mind. One reason we do this podcast is to present people that need to be presented to other people that are interested in things that cross whatever line any other fucker has drawn in the fucking sand. Excuse me, just saying.
It's a very good point, and obviously that's why I love you, Lydia. You're one of my heroes.
Please.
Yeah. Well, no, it's true. It's true.
Thank you.
I'm very much inspired by your art and your point of view, you know, because sometimes people can be radical.
I was just going to say, I am a free radical.
Right, there you go. Exactly. I consider myself as such. And also, as I said, my whole artistic premise was always to speak my mind and speak from my heart. And actually, this is something that I talked about with Allen Ginsberg. And, you know, it was incredible because he is one of the greatest American poets. And at the same time, he was supporting NAMBLA and movements like this that are completely marginalized and eradicated, you know? And he was a true rebel, and that's what being rebel is about. It's not about bending to trends or whatever politics there are and whatever fucking corporate guidelines are imposed on us.
I haven't heard about NAMBLA in a long time. What's going on with that these days? Is that,
I mean, I'm just saying, I'm not a part of it, but I'm just saying.
No, I know what you're saying. It had nothing to do with it. I just
look, as a topic we're not going to go into right now for various reasons, because we don't have enough time is the main thing. And it's all right. Let's just talk about the here and the now. So you said that you're doing all kinds of things right now. Tell us exactly what's coming up in your immediate career and what you're working on, because we're going to be wrapping this up soon. So we need to know what the hell is going on.
Right. Well, career is one of those things that I never think of, but
I don't like the word either, but we'll just say, okay, what about your art hobby? Excuse me, can you tell me what's going on in your art hobby?
I love taking pictures just as much as I did in my teens, and I still write poetry, and I'm passionate about having something in the real world outside of the virtual reality that is being structured by the mega corporations, as I said. And I feel like one of my missions as an artist is to educate people about the dangers of censorship and the dangers of conformism in general, because censorship is probably one of the worst creations that obviously was always a part of human culture and human nature, but it was never introduced on such a global corporate scale. And this
Well,
is
like for patriotism or republicanism, it's based on fear of other. It's like, if you don't agree with the way I am, I don't agree with the way you are, you're canceled. This is the bullshit. Land of the free, home of the brave, crock of fucking shit. More people incarcerated here than even in Russia. More cancel culture than probably anywhere outside of the third world. And here we go. I mean, you come a long way, baby. Oh, really? Not far the fuck enough. This is the Lydian spin. I can't think of anything else. Can you, Timothy, tie it up, doll?
No. I'm gonna look up the NAMBLA's website now. I want to see where it's. I want to see where it's at these days.
Yeah, with a guy that has a band called Child Abuse. He's hanging himself once again.
Oh my.
All right.
Okay.
This has been the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch. Tim, tie it up, doll.
Slava, thank you so much for
And
coming
Slava
on.
Mogutin. Slava, you have so much art and poetry on your website. We'll have that up, and people should just go and investigate what you've been doing in your time in America and before that. And I'm going to call you right now. We're going to talk on the phone. Okay.
all right. Sounds good. Thank you, guys. Thank
Yes,
you for having me.
great seeing you, Slava. Thanks so much.
Hustler Place. The time itself was a fair hustler in black leather, virtuous enough. Stealing is my vocation, something other than your ass. Gentleman of the shade, combination lux. That's me in the corner. Officers against accidents, borders without doctors. Over 60 athletes use same drug. Crowd in the championship bubble, double gobble, triumph or tragedy, prolapsing new people. You wouldn't believe how beautifully preserved their organs are. Things sure get funny at times. For everything else, there's a human popsicle at the ATM machine.